The sun poured through the sheer curtains, spilling a golden light across the bedroom floor. Emily lay still for a moment, listening to the steady rhythm of her husband's breathing beside her. On mornings like this, she reminded herself she was lucky. At least that was what she used to believe. Daniel always left a cup of coffee waiting for her in the kitchen, the steam curling like a promise of normalcy. She padded downstairs, her bare feet grazing against the cool wood, and found the cup in its usual spot. The smell was comforting, grounding, almost enough to push away the unease that had been growing inside her. She smiled faintly, thinking of how friends envied her marriage. They called Daniel devoted, charming, successful. She had played along with the illusion, as much for herself as for anyone else, but even in the warmth of routine, cracks showed. His late nights had become more frequent, his explanations rehearsed. "Just another meeting," he would say, or, "Deadlines, you know how it is." Always with that reassuring smile, the one that made her doubt her own instincts. Yet she noticed the way his eyes darted from hers, how his phone never left his side. At breakfast, he kissed her cheek lightly, almost mechanically. "I'll be late again tonight," he murmured, buttering his toast. She nodded, forcing herself to swallow the bitter taste in her throat. They sat together, yet she felt miles apart, her words caught behind her teeth. A silence hovered that wasn't comfortable anymore. It was suffocating. Emily glanced at the clock, her hand tightening around her mug. She wondered when she had stopped asking questions, when her loyalty had turned into quiet endurance. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to keep the perfect morning alive. But the shadow of doubt stretched longer than the sunlight across their kitchen floor. As Daniel rose to leave, his briefcase clasped tight, he leaned down and pressed a quick kiss against her hair. "Don't wait up," he said. His voice was casual, almost careless. The door shut behind him, leaving the house hollow and still. Emily lingered in the silence, heart aching, and for the first time admitted, something in her marriage was breaking. Even if she couldn't yet see the pieces, the house was silent, wrapped in a stillness that pressed against Emily's chest. She had gone to bed alone, Daniel's side of the bed untouched, the sheets cold where his body should have been. She lay staring at the ceiling, replaying his words from breakfast, that casual, "Don't wait up." The clock glowed past midnight when the phone rang. The sound startled her, sharp against the quiet. She fumbled for the receiver, pulse quickening. "Hello?" Her voice came out hushed, uncertain. There was a pause on the other end, the faint sound of someone breathing. Then a low, unfamiliar male voice whispered, "Tell Daniel the business isn't finished." Emily froze. "Who is this? What are you talking about?" The line went dead. Only silence hummed back. She sat upright, the phone still pressed to her ear, her hand trembling. Her first instinct was to call Daniel, but she stopped herself. What if he grew angry? He always dismissed her fears, made her feel small, paranoid. Maybe it was just a wrong number. But the caller had said his name. Daniel, not Mr. Walker, not a mistake. A direct message. She rose from the bed and paced the room, her bare feet brushing against the rug. The shadows seemed longer tonight, the corners of the house unfamiliar. The doubt she had felt over breakfast now flared into dread. Who was calling him? What business did they mean? She gripped the curtain and pulled it slightly open, peering out into the dark street. Empty. Quiet. Yet she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. When Daniel finally came home, just before dawn, she was sitting upright on the couch, the phone on the coffee table, her eyes wide and sleepless. He offered his usual explanation. Another late meeting, another project. His tie was loosened, his smile tired. Emily forced a nod, her throat dry. But inside, a storm was gathering. She had heard something she wasn't meant to hear. And though she stayed silent, she knew this call was only the beginning. Morning light seeped into the house, but Emily felt no warmth. The call from last night still echoed in her head, the cryptic words circling like vultures. She had barely slept, and when Daniel left for work with the same easy smile, she wondered how he could look so calm while she was unraveling inside. To quiet her thoughts, she busied herself with cleaning. The study was always Daniel's domain, his desk, his shelves, his order. She rarely lingered there, but today she moved slowly through the room, dusting surfaces, aligning books. Her eyes drifted to the heavy oak desk that anchored the space. The drawers were tidy, filled with files and stationery, except for one at the bottom right. When she tugged at the handle, it didn't budge. A locked drawer. Her heart skipped. She crouched closer, running her fingers along the edges, as if the wood might explain itself. She whispered aloud, "What are you hiding, Daniel?" The words startled her, sharp against the quiet room. For several long minutes she stared at the lock, the urge to pry it open burning in her chest. The memory of the phone call pressed her forward, demanding answers. Yet another voice pulled her back, her own guilt. She wasn't the kind of wife who snooped, who mistrusted. She had vowed trust and loyalty, even when cracks had begun to show. Still, why would a man lock away papers from his wife? Why the secrecy if everything was as harmless as he claimed? Emily sat back on her heels, her breath shaky. She imagined confronting him, imagined his dismissive laugh, his practiced words. "You're imagining things, Emily. You're always imagining things." The thought alone made her shrink. She touched the drawer once more before rising. Not today. She would not break it open yet. Instead, she forced herself to leave the study, though her body lingered in the doorway, pulled back by invisible strings. That night, when Daniel returned home, she watched him walk into the study, heard the faint clink of a key against metal. Her stomach tightened. He never saw her watching from the hallway. Her hand pressed against the wall. The drawer wasn't just locked. It was alive with secrets, and now she couldn't stop herself from needing to know what lived inside. The aroma of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, though Emily hardly tasted it as she set the table. Her mind lingered on the locked drawer, on the memory of Daniel's key turning metal while he thought she wasn't watching. By the time he arrived home, loosening his tie and offering that effortless grin, she felt the air between them already stretched thin. They sat across from each other, the clinking of cutlery against plates their only music. Emily studied him, his calm posture, the way he avoided her eyes for too long. The silence felt unbearable, so she spoke. "Daniel, can we talk about something?" He glanced up, chewing slowly. "Of course." "What's on your mind?" Her voice trembled. "Last night the phone rang. A man asked for you. He said something about unfinished business." For a moment his fork paused mid-air. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. "Emily, you really do let your imagination run wild. Probably a wrong number. You worry too much?" Heat rose to her cheeks. "He said your name." "That's not a mistake." Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair with practiced patience. "You're tired. You barely sleep, and when you do, you dream up nonsense. Honestly, Em, you've always been dramatic." Her chest tightened. It was the same tactic, his words slipping like velvet but cutting sharp, making her doubt her own instincts. Still, she pressed on. "And the drawer in your study? Why is it locked?" His eyes flashed just for a second before softening again. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Because some things don't concern you. I'm trying to protect us, to protect you. Do you really want to question my loyalty after everything I do?" Emily pulled her hand back, her stomach twisting. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his tone smothered her, painting her as ungrateful, unstable. After dinner, she slipped away into the bedroom, her heart pounding. She opened her journal and began to write. Dates, times, words. Every argument, every dismissal, every late night. If he wanted her to doubt herself, she would keep proof. In the quiet of her writing, she made a silent vow. She would no longer ignore the fractures in their perfect marriage. The rain came heavy that weekend, streaking down the windows in uneven lines. Daniel had left early for another meeting, his absence leaving the house feeling cavernous. Emily moved through the room slowly, her thoughts heavy. The journal hidden beneath her nightstand already filling with observations. While rearranging the closet in the guest room, she pulled down a faded shoebox wedged at the back of a shelf. Dust clung to its edges as if it hadn't been touched in years. Something inside tugged at her curiosity, an instinct she no longer resisted. She lifted the lid. Inside were scattered papers, ticket stubs, and a handful of old photographs. One in particular made her breath catch. Daniel stood with his arm around a woman Emily had never seen before. They were smiling, close, almost intimate. The backdrop looked like a seaside town, waves crashing behind them. The photo felt alive with a warmth Emily hadn't felt from him in years. Her chest tightened. Who was she? A colleague? An old flame? The casual way Daniel's hand rested at the small of the woman's back spoke of familiarity, of something unspoken. Emily traced the woman's face with her finger, studying her confident smile, her eyes that seemed to know him better than she did. The sound of the front door startled her. Quickly, Emily shoved the photo back into the box, but she knew she couldn't hide her shaken expression when Daniel entered. He glanced at her, then at the shoebox still on the bed. His jaw tightened. "What's this?" he asked lightly, though his tone carried an edge. "I was just cleaning," Emily said, forcing calm. She hesitated, then held up the photograph. "Who is she, Daniel?" He stared at the picture, then gave a short laugh. "An old friend. From years ago. You're really digging through junk now?" His smile looked rehearsed, his eyes cool. "Just a friend?" She pressed. "Yes," he replied sharply, snatching the photo and sliding it back into the box. "And it's none of your concern. Stop looking for problems that aren't there." Emily nodded, but her stomach churned. His dismissal felt too swift, his explanation too thin. When he left the room, she lingered, staring at the empty spot where the photo had been. For the first time, she realized the past wasn't just behind him. It was following them into the present. The photograph lingered in Emily's mind like a bruise that refused to fade. She replayed Daniel's dismissive tone, the way his eyes hardened when she asked too many questions. Trust had once been the foundation of their marriage, but now it felt like sand slipping beneath her feet. 2 nights later, Daniel announced another late meeting. The door shut behind him, leaving Emily in the suffocating silence of the house. Her heart hammered with both fear and resolve as she walked to the study. The drawer seemed to call her name, daring her to uncover what it hid. This time she came prepared. From the kitchen, she fetched a thin butter knife and crouched before the oak desk. Her hands trembled as she wedged the metal into the lock, prying carefully, breath shallow with anticipation. The mechanism gave way with a faint click. The drawer slid open. Inside lay neatly stacked folders bound together with elastic bands. She pulled one free and opened it. Columns of numbers filled the pages. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, cash deposits far beyond what Daniel's salary could explain. Her pulse quickened as she flipped through page after page, the evidence of wealth gained through shadows. At the bottom of the drawer, she found a small black ledger. Unlike the organized folders, this book felt personal. Inside, names were written in Daniel's neat hand. Some were circled, others crossed out in red ink. Emily's throat tightened as she read them, a growing dread curling inside her. Each name seemed tethered to something sinister, as if each represented a debt settled, a life ruined. Or worse, her fingers lingered on one name in particular. A woman's. Not the stranger from the photograph, but another. The date next to it matched the year Daniel had suddenly changed jobs, moving them to a new city without much explanation. Emily's stomach churned. The late nights, the evasions, the call, everything pointed to a truth she didn't want to believe. Her husband was entangled in something dark, something dangerous. The front door creaked. Panic surged through her. Quickly, she stuffed the ledger and folders back into the drawer, forcing it shut just as Daniel's footsteps echoed down the hall. She barely had time to hide the knife before he appeared, loosening his tie, smiling faintly. "Still awake?" he asked, his voice smooth. Emily forced a smile, clutching the armrest of the chair to steady herself. Couldn't sleep, but inside terror clawed at her. She had opened a door she could never close again. Sleep became impossible after discovering the ledger. Emily carried its images in her mind, lists of names, some crossed out, some still waiting their turn. Every smile from Daniel now looked sharpened, every excuse coded in menace. She needed answers, and not from him. The first break came unexpectedly. While grocery shopping one afternoon, a woman approached her. Tall, with dark hair pulled into a loose knot, she studied Emily with hesitant recognition. "You're Daniel's wife, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Emily froze, clutching the basket tighter. "Yes, do I know you?" The woman gave a small, bitter smile. "My name is Claire. I used to know him. Can we talk?" They met later in a quiet cafe, away from the bustle. Claire stirred her coffee but never drank it. "Daniel isn't who you think he is," she began, her voice edged with something between fear and anger. "He told me the same lies, promises of love, safety, a future. But behind it all, he was using me. For money, for connections, for control. Emily's throat tightened. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the man you're living with. And because I can't let him destroy another person the way he destroyed me. Claire's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. She spoke of financial schemes, of debts Daniel created and exploited, of how he discarded people once they had nothing left to give. When I finally tried to leave, he made sure I had nothing. Not just money, my reputation, my friends. He erased me. Emily's hands trembled around her cup. The stories aligned with the ledger, with the late-night calls, with the unease she could no longer dismiss. Hearing them from someone else made the truth undeniable. You're not the first, Claire whispered. And unless you act, you won't be the last. Emily left the cafe with her heart pounding, her breath shallow. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone in her betrayal. Daniel's web stretched wider than she imagined, and now she stood at its center, holding secrets too heavy to bear. At home, she sat in silence, pen hovering over her journal. One truth had become clear. Daniel's lies weren't just her burden. They were a pattern, and patterns could destroy everything in their path. The conversation with Claire haunted Emily. Every word echoed like a warning, yet it also steeled her resolve. When Daniel returned home that night, she tried to mask her unease, but her silence did not go unnoticed. He watched her more closely now. At first, it was subtle. The lingering gaze when she reached for her phone. The questions about where she had been, who she had spoken to. Soon the questions sharpened into interrogations. Why were you out so long today? Who did you meet? His voice carried that blend of charm and accusation that left her fumbling for excuses. Emily began to feel the walls of the house closing in. He started appearing unexpectedly in places he normally ignored. The grocery store, the library, even outside her yoga class. Coincidence, he would insist with a smile, but his eyes betrayed suspicion. He began checking her phone under the guise of playfulness, asking to use it, scrolling too long before handing it back. One evening, she returned to find her journal slightly out of place, the pages not resting as she had left them. Panic coursed through her. Had he read it? The thought alone left her cold. She hid the notebook elsewhere that night, trembling as she slid it under a loose floorboard in the bedroom. The more he pressed, the more careful she became. She spoke less, smiled less, moved quietly through their home like a shadow. Yet beneath her fear, a flame of determination burned. She would not let him erase her, as he had erased others. She needed proof, something undeniable to bring the truth to light. But Daniel sensed the shift. His charm cracked at the edges, impatience leaking through. One night, as they sat in the living room, he leaned closer, his voice low. You've been different lately, Emily. Distracted, almost secretive. I hope you're not keeping anything from me. Her pulse thundered, but she forced a calm smile. Of course not. His eyes lingered on her, searching for cracks in her expression. At last, he leaned back, though the suspicion didn't leave his face. Emily knew the trap was tightening. Yet with each coil, her resolve only grew sharper. If Daniel thought he could cage her in silence, he was wrong. Emily could no longer carry the silence. The ledger, the photograph, the phone call, Claire's trembling voice. They all pressed against her like a weight that threatened to crush her. That night, as Daniel entered the house with his usual casual greeting, she felt her body stiffen. She decided this would end. He dropped his keys on the counter and glanced at her. You look tense. Something wrong? Her hands clenched at her sides. Stop pretending, Daniel. I know. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk twitching at his lips. Know what exactly? Her voice shook, but she held firm. The accounts. The names in your ledger, the lies. All of it. For the first time, his mask slipped. The smirk vanished, replaced by a sharp, cold stare. You went through my things. His tone was low, dangerous, ill. I had to, she whispered. You've been lying to me for years, using me as a shield while you built this empire of ruin. Daniel stepped closer, his presence suffocating. And what do you think you're going to do with this knowledge? Run to the police? They'll laugh at you. You're nothing without me, Emily. You always have been. She flinched but refused to back away. Claire told me everything. You destroyed her just like the others. But you won't destroy me. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Pain radiated up her arm, but she stared into his eyes, refusing to look away. He leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. You want to blame me? Fine. But every choice I made, every lie I told was because of you. Your fragility, your weakness. I carried the weight you couldn't bear. Tears burned her eyes, but rage surged stronger. No, Daniel. You carried greed. You carried cruelty. Don't you dare put that on me. The words snapped something in him. He shoved her hard, and she stumbled into the table, pain shooting through her ribs. A glass shattered on the floor. The house filled with the sound of both their breaths, hers ragged, his feral. Emily forced herself upright, her body trembling. I won't stay silent anymore, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Daniel's eyes darkened, but he said nothing. He simply grabbed his coat, stormed out, and slammed the door so violently the walls shook. Emily collapsed into a chair, her body aching, her spirit scarred. But inside, a new strength had awakened. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. The night after their confrontation, Daniel never returned. Emily waited in the living room until dawn, the silence of the house stretching into something unbearable. His absence, once a blessing, now felt ominous. When the hours became days, fear nodded with a strange relief. She had wanted him gone, but not like this. News traveled quickly. Whispers reached her first through neighbors, then through the cautious voices of colleagues. Daniel had enemies, people he owed, people he had betrayed. Some claimed he had run, vanishing before his empire collapsed. Others murmured of darker endings, that he had been silenced by the very men he crossed. Emily tried to move through her days, but shadows followed. Every phone ring jolted her. Every knock at the door tightened her chest. When detectives finally arrived, their presence felt inevitable. Two men in plain clothes sat across from her at the dining table. Their questions were pointed but calm. Mrs. Walker, do you know of any reason your husband would be connected to a series of disappearances? Her hands tightened around her mug. Disappearances? The older detective leaned forward. 3 individuals from his business dealings. 2 found dead, 1 still missing. Your husband's name appears in financial records linked to each. Emily's blood ran cold. The ledger flashed in her memory. The names, the red ink, the dates. She swallowed hard. I don't know anything, she whispered, though guilt burned at the lie. They exchanged glances, jotting notes. One slid a card across the table. If he contacts you, Mrs. Walker, we need to know. For your safety. When they left, Emily collapsed into her chair, heart hammering. Relief coursed through her veins. If Daniel was truly gone, she might finally be free. Yet terror twisted alongside it. A man like him didn't simply vanish. He staged, he manipulated. He waited. That night, alone in bed, she stared at the empty space beside her. The echoes of his voice still clung to the walls, accusing, taunting. She closed her eyes, but sleep never came, because deep down she didn't believe Daniel was dead. His greatest lie was survival, and she feared he was out there, watching, waiting for the moment to return. Emily sat at the dining table, the detective's card still resting where they had left it. For days she battled with herself, torn between fear of Daniel's retribution and the crushing guilt of silence. But the ledger weighed on her conscience like a stone. She could no longer pretend ignorance. One rainy morning, she walked into the precinct clutching a plain envelope. Inside were photocopies she had made, records, transactions, and, most damning, the ledger pages with names and dates. When she slid the envelope across the desk, her hands trembled. But her voice did not. These belong to my husband. They'll tell you who he really was. The detectives exchanged looks of quiet astonishment. One leaned forward. Mrs. Walker, this is enough to unravel everything. News spread faster than she imagined. By the week's end, her face was on local broadcasts, her name printed in bold headlines, the wife who spoke out. Cameras crowded her lawn, reporters shouting questions she never wanted to answer. Some called her courageous. Others whispered she had been complicit all along. Emily felt the double-edged blade of exposure. Strangers reached out with sympathy, while others sent letters drenched in venom. At the grocery store, whispers trailed behind her. She was pitied, admired, doubted, despised all at once. What haunted her most were the interviews. Sitting beneath harsh studio lights, she was asked again and again to recount the life she had lived, the lies she had believed. Each word felt like peeling open a wound, yet she forced herself to speak. to bear the humiliation and the grief. I thought I knew him, she told them. But I was living inside a mask he wore. At night, when the world quieted, the weight returned. She would sit in her darkened living room, listening to the echo of her own voice on the television replay. No matter how loudly the world debated her innocence or guilt, she carried the same unbearable truth. She had loved a man who never existed, and beneath her relief, a deeper fear remained. Daniel was still out there, and exposure might not have destroyed him. It might have provoked him. The cameras eventually left. The reporters found new stories, and the neighbors grew tired of whispering. Yet the silence that returned to Emily's house was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of survival. She lived among the echoes of Daniel's shadow. But slowly, each day, she felt the weight lift, like a heavy curtain being drawn back to let in light. In the beginning, she had flinched at every sound outside, half expecting to find him standing at the door with that familiar smile masking fury. But weeks turned into months, and Daniel never returned. Whether dead, imprisoned in his own web, or merely watching from some hidden corner of the world, she no longer cared. He was gone, and she remained. That truth was her victory. Emily spent long evenings with her journal, filling its pages not with Daniel's lies but with her own truths. She wrote about the nights she endured, the bruises invisible to the world, the manipulation that had almost erased her sense of self. She wrote until the words no longer carried pain but strength. One afternoon she visited Claire, the woman who had once been broken by Daniel, now embraced Emily like a sister in shared survival. Together they spoke not of the damage he caused but of the futures they were building. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to laugh, her voice carrying freely without fear of correction or dismissal. Walking home, she realized how much had changed. The world had not crumbled without Daniel's presence. If anything, it had begun to bloom again. The air felt clearer, the streets brighter, even the quiet corners of her home less suffocating. She understood that freedom was not found in erasing the scars but in living despite them. That night, she stood at the window, staring into the dark horizon. Her reflection stared back, older, wearier, but unbroken. Daniel's lies had tried to define her, to trap her in silence, but she had outlived them. She had faced the truth, exposed it, and stepped into the world carrying nothing but her own strength. For the first time in years, Emily whispered into the stillness of her home, "I am free." And though the shadows lingered at the edges, they no longer terrified her. They were only remnants of a past she had survived, proof that she had walked through darkness and emerged with her truth intact.